Since time immemorial, we've told stories to children in the hopes of fashioning better adults. Don't go out into the woods at night. Beware strange adults and stranger animals. Temper your wants. Practice moderation. Do not eat the gingerbread house. Learn restraint. Listen to your elders when they are wise, but know that growing up is a dangerous business. Young girls coming into beauty attract envious eyes. Be temperate in love. Do not destroy yourself for romance. Don't cry wolf for attention, you little shit. Pride comes before the fall. Slow and steady wins the race. Do not judge a book by its cover. Make promises carefully and always keep them. The frog, if loved, might be a prince. Patience is a virtue. Prudence is more valuable than trust. The historic purpose of the fairy tale has been to impart a simple moral lesson, a practical lesson, or both at once. Those timeless entries in the genre are successful because they embed observations useful to adulthood in the heightened imaginative language of children. It's one thing to say the wolf is dangerous, but getting yourself chewed up by nature's meanest fairies indicates an intellectual as well as a naturalistic foible. The same naive innocence that might get Little Red Riding Hood munched by the animal might just as easily see her preyed upon by the wolves in human form. The purpose of the fairy tale is not to fortify the child against any particular expression of danger, it's to forearm the child against danger itself. These are stories that help kids grow up both in the moral and educational sense, and in the survival of the species sense as well. The fairy tale serves a vital purpose in evolutionary psychology. One of the darkest recurring motifs across fairy stories is that of the wicked stepmother. It appears in folktales from across the world: Snow White, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, the child who came from an egg, the well of the world's end, Fireboy, and it admits of several explanations. The Freudian psychoanalyst Bruno Bettelheim, in his book The Uses of Enchantment, was wont to read sexual jealousy into the relationship between Snow White and her wicked stepmother, which seems fair enough. The wicked queen obsesses over her loss of sexual status in the eyes of the mirror, and her murderous pursuit of the younger and prettier girl transfers a mundane competition over looks into a generalized morality play about the uglifying sins of jealousy and narcissistic vanity. Narcissus loses himself in his reflection. The queen's reflection leads directly to her death. But, like most priests of the dead religion of psychoanalysis, the Freudian begins with a conclusion and goes in search of an argument. The older woman's jealousy of a blossoming young virgin rings true to an extent, but then Bettelheim goes on to label the dwarves an expression of permanent pre-Oedipal masculinity, and he stubbornly persists in his theory of sexual competition between Snow White and the Queen over the love and sexual attention of the father, despite the fact that the father, in most versions of this story, isn't even in the story to begin with. Also, like many of his kind, Bettelheim was massively influential, and people only noticed he'd lied about his credentials, abused his child patients, falsified the results of his experiments, and plagiarized large sections of his work, including The Uses of Enchantment, after he'd died and his damage had been done. In no true science could such a man still be so influential, but as Platoon's law goes, stick the word social in front of anything, justice, democracy, science, and it ceases to be the thing it claims it is. The wicked stepmother motif, though, is recurrent and lends its name to a more robust and less sex-obsessed scientific finding. The Cinderella effect is the name given to the demonstrably and significantly higher incidence of child abuse in step-parental homes. In fact, the presence of a step-parent in the home is the single greatest determiner of child abuse, stemming from nothing more mundane than the competition for scarce resources. If you're poor, if you live a subsistence lifestyle, if you're frequently beset by famine, by droughts, floods, and all the various things that made medieval European life so precarious, nature compels the parent to favor their biological children over any holdovers from their partner's past relationships. This is the instigating factor in Hansel and Gretel, where the poor woodsman's second wife demands that he abandon his children in the woods during a famine. There are few better examples to disprove the modern myth that stories for children are allowed, or even expected to be, shallow and unserious things. You don't get a much darker lesson than that after the death or divorce of a parent, parent, little Jimmy should really prepare for the worst. A healthy distrust for strangers includes strangers in your own house. These are serious lessons designed to make unserious children grow up fast in a world where an active imagination can just as easily get you killed as save your life. The modern world has developed plenty of systems designed to mitigate the harsher realities of nature, but the danger in the mass assumption of safety is that the world itself comes to resemble a cautionary fairy tale. The persistence of the Cinderella effect suggests that modernity isn't quite the magically perfect end of history it was once billed to be, but the pretense that it was has been responsible for the wholesale destruction of the type of serious, formative stories that once prepared us to deal with the world as it really is. We have no need of fairy tales when we're living in one. The irony of modern childhood is that little kiddies are coddled to protect them from dangers adults won't acknowledge. They are not prepared to face the reason for their coddling. One of Bettelheim's better and more original observations was that, writing I think in the 1970s, many parents, and I quote, want their children's minds to function as their own do, as if mature understanding of ourselves and the world and our ideas about the meaning of life did not have to develop as slowly as our bodies and minds. To find deeper meaning, he wrote, one must become able to transcend the narrow confines of a self-centered existence and believe that one will make a significant contribution to life, if not right now, then at some future time. This feeling is necessary if a person is to be satisfied with himself and with what he's doing. In order not to be at the mercy of the vagaries of life, one must develop one's inner resources so that one's emotions, imagination, and intellect mutually support and enrich one another. Our positive feelings give us the strength to develop our rationality. Only hope for the future can sustain us in the adversities we unavoidably encounter. Essentially, this is an argument for old fairy tales against the modern fairy tale. It holds that confronting children with reality, weaponizing their vivid imaginations, prepares them for reality. Children's stories should be some of the most serious and important works in fiction because they will define the adults who define the world. Where those stories are absent or diluted or abstracted into a safe and unchallenging mush, the quality of adults will diminish. Having never been confronted with reality, adults will create for themselves an emotionally and intellectually stunted unreality. They will be incapable of grappling with the world as it is, and powerless against the wolves, real or metaphorical, of the forest. Adult myths, such as those we see on our screens today, will be more childish than the children's stories our grandparents read. Reality will be less real than the fairy tale. For example, it's a quirk of old fairy tales that, though most kinetic abuse is objectively carried out by men, there are hardly any wicked stepfathers. Where the father figure cops any blame in a fairy story, the kings of The Little Mermaid and Rapunzel come most readily to mind, their failure tends to be that they are rigid and overprotective. Alternatively, they were too weak to resist the wicked stepmother's demands, as in Hansel and Gretel. The usual boring explanation for this, the modern fairy tale, is that patriarchy is to blame. But feminists, like Freudians, prioritize answers before they have the facts. What really unites many of these fairy tales, especially those where the child surrogate is a female character, Snow White and Cinderella again, Rapunzel, The Little Mermaid, the White Witch and Susan in the Narnia stories, the Juniper Tree, the Six Swans, Beauty and the Beast. What unites all of these is that these are stories about female power. The wicked stepmother trope stems less from the villainization of poor women by a patriarchal society than it does from an acknowledgement that women exercise tremendous power, both over each other and over their often hapless menfolk. In several of these examples, particularly in Snow White, woman is the origin of civilization itself. Let's consider Snow White in more detail. In the Grimm version of the story, and then especially in Walt Disney's 1937 classic, Snow White is the single most powerful character in its world. This is particularly pronounced in 1937, where Disney himself made true characters of the animals and of the dwarves, who were absent and generically representative, respectively, in the folkloric source material. Snow White brings order to a chaotic world. The animals act in concert. The dwarves are civilized by her presence. They learn the basics of cleanliness and of hygiene that without her presence they would not think to exercise. Not dissimilarly, Wendy is the true protagonist of Peter Pan and that story's most powerful agent. Like Snow White, she is a maturing and a civilizing influence, and it's her accession to motherhood that is the story's ultimate expression of feminine influence. It's an odd kind of patriarchy that's brought into being, then shaped and then sustained by a matriarch. Wendy's role with respect to the Lost Boys is similar to Snow White with respect to the animals and the dwarves. The unspoken assumption is that the young woman is ultimately responsible for civilization, but she remains virtuous because, unlike the wicked stepmother, the fallen woman, she does not view her agency in terms of its raw power. Snow White, like Wendy, is unassuming. She acts in charitable and virtuous ways, without regard to her own station. Her nature civilizes the world around her. She doesn't seek to use this natural power to unnaturally shape the world around her. Snow White's meta goal is simplistic. She wants love, she wants to be loved and by a prince. But her proximate aim is always order, charity, cleanliness, and good behavior. She is the embodiment and chief agent of virtue in the world. The prince barely features in the 1937 film, which I believe is the first instance of the story even to introduce him at the beginning, and is lesser spotted still in Grimm's fairy tale. The prince isn't really a character in either. Rather, the prince is a moral reward for good behavior. In the Grimm fairy tale, Snow White does not return victorious to rule over the lands the queen forced her to flee. Rather, she goes to live with the prince in his kingdom. The wicked queen is invited to the wedding feast and cannot resist the invitation, as she is equal parts obsessed with, besotted, and terrified by the young woman Snow White has become. It's there that she meets a crueler end than Walt Disney wanted to show. Iron shoes are placed in hot coals and she is made to wear them and dance in them until she's dead. The story, which to be honest is full of plot holes, sorry Grimms, subordinates character to theme in that moment. Those lethal dancing shoes are the sum total of the queen's existence. She hasn't just earned them, she's already lived them without realizing it. The shoes work as an extension of her moral character. The universe is punishing her just as it rewarded Snow White for their innate characteristics, for their behavior, for the way they comport themselves in the world. The shoes might also work as an expression of the king's justice, since this is really our stand-in for universal morality, and the difference between power as it's exercised by men and power as it's exercised by women. The former is domineering and protecting, the latter creates the things worth protecting. It takes a bit more doing to make it an extension of Snow White's character, though you can read it as an expression of her new maturity. Having bitten the apple, symbol of knowledge that it is, and survived, she has no more sympathy for the wicked queen. She's overcome her childish naivety and outgrown a child's trusting kindness. But these last two both require that you read a little way beyond the story itself. Throughout the story proper, Snow White's great strength, her virtue, remains essentially childlike, which makes it also her great weakness. Her kindness to the dwarves is a kindness to strangers that earns her great affection and loyalty, but it also places her in great danger. She routinely falls for the queen's tricks because she applies her same naive goodness to everyone she meets. She has not yet learned to be discerning. Though the dwarves caution her against accepting any strangers into the house, the queen's various disguises are all sympathetic to her. Thus does Snow White almost die to an overtight corset, a poison comb, and finally the poisoned apple. The plot hole is, obviously, that the queen bothers with these elaborate schemes where a knife, like the huntsman's, would have done the job much more quickly and efficiently. But, symbolically, the thing that makes Snow White powerful in the tale is that she has no true conception of power. The paradox is that her powerlessness is the thing that makes her powerful. If she'd come to the dwarves with a view to bend them to her will, to manipulate them, to make them like her, to have them see things in her that are not truly there, she would surely have failed just as the queen does. The objects the queen weaponizes are symbolic of the risks that growing girls are confronted with. The corset, the comb, and the apple are all expressions of vanity and, if we want to go back to Freud, sexuality. Snow White needs the help of the dwarves and of the prince to overcome them, but she's only worthy of their help because her virtue, in both senses, remains intact. To be otherwise, to be aware of her own power, to use it to manufacture desired ends, would ultimately turn Snow White into a younger version of the evil queen. These quaint old tales convey a truth about the immense power of women that modern adaptations written by modern adult children stuck in their own childish fantasies invariably miss. In 2025 Snow White, where so much of what passes for the dialogue is designed to tell you the theme, embodied in its protagonist, described as fair, you come away with the lesson that young women should aspire to a kind of assertive political power that the movie itself is incapable of defining. What are children, and particularly young girls, supposed to learn from Snow White's example? That, on the one hand, there is no hierarchy of power, because hierarchies of power and especially of ownership are bad. The bounty of the land belongs to the people who work it. Bad deeds are the product of greedy economic policies. The queen hoarding wealth and luxury is evil, in part because inequality is definitionally wrong. And yet, on the other hand, Snow White's arc culminates with the assumption of rulership, retaking her father's house, the seat of monarchic authority, which she uniquely deserves because she is, paradoxically, top of the egalitarian hierarchy. It's not a position she earns or works for, it's not a position evidenced by her good behavior, her virtue is not how she acts absent power. No, it's something she was born with. Her characteristics were literally assigned at birth, and her problem, the challenge she has to overcome, is that she merely lacks awareness of her own power. As soon as she awakens to it, and realizes how special and awesome she is, irrespective of her actions toward those less awesome than her victory is ordained. It's a fait accompli. What we have is a mongrel of the hero's and the heroine's journey, one that takes the worst cliché conclusions from each and clumsily combines them. It mangles together the vanities of male and female children. Of the male, that assertive political power and rulership of the world is the self-justifying goal. Of the female, that they are innately most deserving of other people's love, admiration, and affection, the center around which the universe must turn. The mitigating lessons of each journey type, the thing that separates the hero from the tyrant in a skillful tale, are studiously avoided in this movie. Both heroes and heroines' journeys in their traditional forms concern themselves with the person you will be at the close of the story. The journey is that which ensures Luke will not turn to the dark side like his father before him, even when his power exceeds his father's. By a similar token, it's what establishes Snow White as somebody worth defending. In both cases, with different emphases, how you act when you lack power is what determines whether you deserve it. And sometimes, often in fact, it reveals that power is neither what nor where you thought it was in the first place. But the modern Snow White omits all of this in favor of a vague and confused paean to power for its own sake. It is, simultaneously, something Snow White desires, deserves, and already has. The result is a kind of sexless matriarchy in which everybody is equal under the protagonist, except those who deny the protagonist, who are cast out of the harem. The only lesson the film imparts is that to be a modern woman, you should be fully conscious of your innate worth, and that this predetermines your right to rule the world. The new Snow White retells the distinctly modish real-world fairy tale, which has it that girls must be empowered to speak out, because anything that emanates from their bodies is brilliant and pure, and the only reason anyone would not want to listen to it is that they are a man and men are sexist. The modern Snow White believes that the thing that afflicts young women is the expectation that they must be quiet to be seen as good. This is a myth born of loud feminists who think society has a problem with the fact they speak rather than with what they speak. It's not that you're a woman, darling. It's that you're an obnoxious prat and you add nothing to the conversation. Loud, dumb men meet similar disapprobation. The difference is they don't care, and they certainly don't whine about it. Stop bleating about the consequences of your own unlikability. You don't have a right to be taken seriously when you are not not a serious person, my dear. Get better or learn to take it like a man. Snow White 2025 represents the precise opposite of the message of the 1937 film and the original fairy tale. Where each of these taught children the difference between decency and narcissism, the remake elevates narcissism to a distinctly feminine virtue. What we have then, to go back to Bettelheim, is a story nominally for children, written by adults who want to skip the actual process of growing up. More than that, and more damning than that, it's a story nominally for children written by adults who have themselves skipped the actual process of growing up. Whenever one responds that, well, why so critical, it's just a kid's movie, these people are arguing, in effect, for more of this garbage. As C.S. Lewis wrote, a children's story that can only be enjoyed by children is not a good children's story in the slightest. No book is really worth reading at the age of 10, which is not equally, and often far more, worth reading at the age of 50 and beyond. If we don't start taking children's entertainment seriously again, nobody will ever grow up.